Welcome back to Law News Network. I'm Heather Hansen, and we have a full afternoon for you today. We are starting the case regarding Jessica Chambers' murder. That's the case Mississippi versus Quentin Tellis. We talked a lot about this case yesterday. This case has received a large amount of coverage for many, many years, which oftentimes lends itself to some confusion about what's true and what isn't. We're going to have to see that, and a lot of that is going to be laid out in the opening statements that should begin around 2 o'clock Eastern time this afternoon. To talk to us about that case and what's going on locally is a local reporter who was on with us yesterday. He's a fabulous guest, Maxey. He reports for the Commercial Appeal and has been following this case closely. Good morning, Ron.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks for being here. I want to talk to you first about the jury. So we know that a jury has been chosen. What can you tell us about the jury?
Well, the jury was chosen yesterday in Pike County, Mississippi, which is in the extreme southern portion of the state on the Louisiana border. They went to Pike County to seat the jury because it has very similar demographics to Panola County, where the trial is being held. They got the jury seated about 4 o'clock Central Time yesterday, which actually was a little faster than I thought. It was a pretty aggressive schedule to try to get the jury for this seated in a day, but they got it done by about 4. We ended up with 7 men, 5 women. It's an even racial split, 6 Caucasian, 6 African American. They gave them time to go home and pack, and then transported them some 200 miles north last night to Panola County. And they are there ready to get started, I believe at 1 o'clock Central today with opening arguments.
When you note, Ron, that there's similar demographics, what exactly does that mean? Do you know whether they, looked at the community to see whether they are similar racial makeup, similar gender makeup, similar occupations, similar socioeconomics? Do you know? I saw that reported as well, and I wondered what it was they were looking for as far as those similarities.
It was really, I think, primarily the racial makeup and the socioeconomic. Of course, in Mississippi, it's the socioeconomic is going to be pretty much the same in most parts of the state, but the racial makeup was pretty much the same here as well. The same type of occupations, a lot of blue collar workers, that sort of thing. So I think all of those really factored into it, but race was a big part of it.
And the fact that it's evenly split certainly is something that's interesting, and I'm sure that the attorneys took that into consideration when choosing a jury, because like it or not, that is certainly a factor, as we know from history and Supreme Court cases, that this is certainly something that the lawyers do consider. Tell me a little bit, have you heard anything about any jurors who mentioned that they were aware of this case or claimed hardships yesterday? Do you have any information about how jury selection went and maybe how it got done so quickly?
I really wish I did have more information. Of course, I was not there for it. This is some 300 miles or so from where we are, so we were covering it long distance, pretty much the same as you. And I would have been very interested myself in hearing the questioning of the jurors, really about the only thing I do know when I talked to John Champion, the district attorney, by text yesterday afternoon to ask if the selection was done. He seemed pleased that it went as quickly as it did and didn't hit any snags. I didn't get the impression that they found anything troubling in the jury pool. They had trouble finding people who were not familiar with the case, and that was a big concern, because even though this was more than 200 miles away, really nationwide and certainly within Mississippi, this case has gotten wide attention everywhere you go. And I know there was some concern about being able to select a jury pool, and I think given the fact that they got it done so quickly, that must not have been an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. When you were on with me yesterday, we both noted that it was an aggressive scheduling to think that it would be done in just one day. I've had many cases that we're not getting juries in just one day, and in such a high-profile case, I think we shared the concern that it wouldn't happen. So it's fortunate for everyone that it has. Now they're staying at a local hotel, I would assume, and then going to be bussed back and forth together in the mornings and back in the evenings. Is that your understanding?
They are. That's my understanding as well. Of course, Batesville is not very large, and so I'm not sure how many hotels there are. I don't think they're very far from the courthouse, but yeah, they'll be sequestered in nearby lodging for the duration of the trial.
And it's our understanding is that they're going to be holding court on Saturday. Do you think that that will happen too?
I think it will. I have not heard anything to the contrary. I know this judge, given the fact that the jury is being kept so far away from home for so long, he wants to move things along as quickly as possible. And so I would be very surprised if they do not have court on Saturday.
Yeah, it's 40 witnesses is our understanding of what they anticipate seeing as called by both sides in this case. We talked a little bit yesterday about what you and I both believe will be one of the focuses, which is the cell phone evidence, and potentially having the cell phone evidence place Quentin Tellis somewhere very close to Jessica Chambers right around the time of her death. Do you have any sense of any experts that are going to be called for either side other than that type of an expert?
I do not. I have not. I think the witness list is heavy on friends and associates of hers. There are certainly some people who will speak to the technical aspects of how they gather the phone records and that sort of thing, since that is a large role in it. I don't know how heavily the witness list is weighted toward those kind of people, but there will certainly be some discussion of, this is what we found and this is how we were able to connect this to this person and so forth, because I think that's going to be primarily what ties this case all together, is phone records, from every indication I've heard.
And that leads right into Sidebar Steve's question. One of our chatters just asked. He said the prosecution says that they have from 6:30 to 7:30 on the day that Jessica was killed covered. Do you have an understanding as to what they mean by that? Is that via the cell phone records?
I think so. I know early on, about a month into this investigation, John Champion, the prosecutor, called all the local media in for a press conference seeking public assistance, because they did have a 1 hour gap in her time frame that last day. They had been able to account for everywhere she had been all day except for one period from about 6:30 to 7:30, when her phone apparently went basically off the radar, which is very unusual for her. Of course, this was a teenager, a young woman who, like most people that age, was on social media all the time, apparently constantly texting. And suddenly about 6:30, that just stops. And we have a 1 hour gap when they were not seeing any activity from her. And so authorities were very concerned about filling in that 1 hour gap. Apparently they did so to their satisfaction. Mr. Champion has said since then that they absolutely have that 1 hour gap now accounted for. What that means, where they found she was at during that 1 hour period, I don't know. I'm very eager to find that out during testimony.
Well, and to your point about the text messages, I'm sure we'll hear and see a lot of those text messages, who she was texting with, and perhaps the defense using those messages to cast aspersions on other potential people who could have done this other than Quentin Tellis. Do you know anything about the content, the actual substance of those text messages?
I don't. I mean, just a lot of banter back and forth between her and friends. Everything I've heard, most of it, was very innocent. There was nothing sinister in any of it. And of course, the trick was to find the tidbits in there that did lead them to think that something untoward was going on. And I'm sure they found that, but I have not heard what that may be.
Yeah, if nothing else, those text messages will certainly further personalize Jessica. Hearing from her voice via those text messages, we've seen in other cases, can be very effective and even heart-wrenching. So it's going to be challenging. It's certainly going to be challenging for her family. We talked yesterday about the fact that her brother had died, I think just months before she died. Is that right?
About roughly a year. It was just about a year before.
Does she have any other surviving siblings, Ron?
She has her father is remarried, and I think she has a stepsister who is, I forget her age. She's pretty young, and I know her dad talks about how she's the spitting image of Jessica. And she also has an older sister who has early on talked, fairly extensively about Jessica. So I think she had one full brother, and the one who died, and then a full sister, and then her half sister.
And do you expect that all of those family members will be attending trial every day to support the case and to support her parents?
I would think so. They have been they've gotten, so as not to hinder the investigation, they have not talked much in recent months, but I know they have been following it closely from the start. Her mother started the Justice for Jessica website, which it just went crazy. I mean, people from all over the country opened up a dialogue through that website. So her mother has been very active in communicating with people about what was going on and looking for any information they could offer. And I'm sure all the family will be in the courtroom for the entire trial.
One of our viewers, Katie, had a question. There's been some talk, and I think we mentioned this yesterday, about Quentin Tellis perhaps being romantically involved with Jessica Chambers in those weeks leading up to her death. What information do we have to support? I know that's sort of been what's been understood by people covering the case, but what do we have to support that?
Well, I know, and I have not talked to this person, but a close friend of Jessica's, I think a TV account of this has indicated that Quentin Tellis was in the car with her that last morning, and she said, "Who is this? I've never seen this person before." And the friend said she wasn't intimidated by him. He didn't seem like anybody dangerous, but that it was somebody new, and that just given their body language and the way they interacted together, it appeared that they were, in some sort of romantic relationship. She had known him a long time. They grew up together, and it is important to understand it's not like this is someone who just suddenly come into her life. This is a small town. I don't know that they had always traveled in the same circles, but they had known one another, for a long time, had mutual acquaintances, and I think they had only recently become acquainted, and to some extent apparently were romantically involved.
The fact that it's such a small town, you mentioned that yesterday as well, that all of these students knew each other, had gone to school. It was such a small town that almost everyone in the town knew one another. Do you think that made the investigation easier or harder? It kind of can cut both ways, because people may be more likely to cover for one another, but then again, also you can sort of trace things a little more easily.
Yeah, that's a good question, and the investigators would have to talk about how that breakdown was, but I'm sure it was a little bit both. It certainly, geographically gave them a much smaller area to have to focus on, a smaller pool of people to talk to. But as you say, there was to some degree people wanting to protect one another, and I think as the rumors got out there, it may at times have taken on, people may have taken on a more defensive tone. They knew things had been said about them, and then investigators were following up on leads based on those rumors they had heard. And I think in some cases, people got a little defensive and said, "Hey, this is just other people in the community talking trash. I had nothing to do with this." So there was a little bit of all that going on.
One of the viewers, once again, Steve, asked about the defense attorney. I think you said yesterday it's a public defender who's representing Quentin Tellis. Is that right?
It is. It's a public defender from Jackson, and I must say I really do not know much about them. I haven't had any direct communication with them, but it is a public defender and an assistant from Jackson who will be representing him. And there had been some discussion before the trial started of some sort of plea arrangement, but that did not happen. So they are, his public defenders are going forward with the case.
Yeah, it's a little bit surprising to me that there hasn't been a plea, given that the death penalty has been taken off the table. And maybe it signals that the defense feels like they have a strong defense here. There's so little that we know. Do you think that that's the reason?
It could be. I've also heard, and of course this is only something I've heard, and it would surprise me if it were true, but that there may be some sort of book deal in the offing for the defense attorneys, and I don't know if that plays into them wanting to, pursue the case, or, what sort of role that plays. I'm going to be interested in seeing, what their defense is.
Oh my, that will just give attorneys an even worse name if that's the reason for making everyone go through the hell of a trial.
And I don't know that that's true.
Right, no, listen, we probably won't know until after the trial, when perhaps some of these players start speaking a little bit more to the media. Another question that Cookie had, another one of our chatters, that is an interesting question. I haven't heard any mention of this, but is there any evidence that you've heard that rape was involved before Jessica was killed?
No, absolutely not. I have not heard of that. Of course, it was a brutal crime, but I've heard no no evidence or really even no rumblings in the community that may have been the case. And I think talk of that would have surfaced if there were any reason to think so.
Yeah, I would think the same thing. Now, today we have openings. I know you're going to be live in the courtroom there tomorrow. I'm sure that we'll be checking in with you, Ron, because there's just so much information that you can glean from being there, and we so appreciate that first person information. So thanks again for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you as this case continues.
Thank you. Look forward to talking to you also.